think the environment has been
What we're saying is have a heart.
We've got to be able to regenerate our
There'll be
context.
people who are kind, people who are cruel, but that's life. You can be passionate about videos. I'm fine with that.
What's wrong with Singaporeans?
Welcome back. In an interview with the New York Times in 2010, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew cautioned the Singaporean youth of today that racial harmony was not something that could be placed on autopilot, reminding them that the social network connecting different racial communities was a fragile web that could easily be destroyed. Law and Foreign Affairs Minister Mr. Shanmugam also said that racial fault lines still exist in Singapore. So may I ask the panel, what are the racial fault lines that we have?
I must explain when I say there's racism, but it doesn't affect me because I'm rich and powerful. And I tell you, when I was a child, I don't look Chinese and I don't really look Indian. So people will ask me...
You just look beautiful.
Right, I know. And people will say, this is Simisek Lang, that means in Hokkien, it means what race are you? So I say, my dad is Indian and my mother is Chinese. Immediately you say, Ting Chap Cheng. You know what's Chap Cheng? Chap Cheng is 10 breeds, right? And they look down on mixed children.
Not today.
Well, not today, not as much, but in our time it was always there, all right? But because I think my father was rich and powerful, it didn't bother us, because we were not in the school begging for money, and we were rich kids with a driver, we lived well, we had money, etc. We could go abroad to study, so it never affected us. But my other friends, the poor ones, the Indians next door and all that,
and the poor Chinese?
Well, not really so startling, but if something goes wrong, they say, the fellow Indian, they will even say, even my grandmother, my Chinese grandmother said to me, told me to put more powder because I'm so black. This is my Chinese grandmother, isn't it? So racism is there, but whether you rise above it.
This was in the 19.
I'm not that old,
Okay, this was
it's the 1950s, even 1960s.
Okay, so what is the situation today?
Even today, let's face it, it's all started with this Speak Mandarin campaign, right? Last time, all the different races will get together. You see your Indian friend is, hey, hi, mama. He won't be unhappy, right? Nowadays, you call an Indian a mama, you see what he'll probably do to you, he'll probably punch you.
Wait,
right?
You said that it started with the Speak Mandarin campaign,
yes,
which would be post-1965, but you're relating to us your experiences as a school kid, which would be in the 1950s.
I was in school in 1966.
Yes,
right?
So
but it became worse. It became worse with the Speak Mandarin campaign because the link language of Malay was removed. Right? So only Chinese must speak Chinese. And I was always against this idea of the SAP schools, where Mandarin was the only foreign language, the only second language. Right? If they had a SAP school with top Indian class or Malay class, I've got nothing to object against it,
But that's not totally true. I took Malay in school.
But that was much later, I think.
No, it was around the same time.
But when they started, most of the SAP schools only had Chinese. I think some of you will remember that. Right? Only the Chinese. So all the Chinese went to the SAP schools, which are all the good schools, and eventually your entire civil service will be run by Chinese one. It's a fact. Right? And when I went back to run my father's business, I played the game. If I speak to a Chinese, I'll say, I'm Mrs. Lim. If I speak to a Malay, I'll say, I'm Ivy Singh. And it works that way. Right? It's a fact. And even nowadays, I speak as I do because I'm not afraid of anybody, right? But because I'm financially stable and I'm already 65 years old, I couldn't give a damn if people don't agree with me and they think I'm wrong. But you look at what the HDB is doing. They control the Malays living there, the Indians living there, the Chinese living there, right? Because too many Indians is an Indian enclave. What about Maya Road? It's full of Indians. Isn't that an enclave? Orchard Road is full of Caucasians. Isn't that an enclave? Right? You know what I'm saying? So you look at certain condominiums, it's full of one race, it's not enclave. Why? Because they are rich and it's not enclave. Only poor people form an enclave. So to me, I think there's a lot of policies which are done, which actually make that bad. Make it worse, you see, make people more obvious of it.
Are we all in full agreement with Ivy?
You can disagree, you know, I don't have my knife with me today.
Well, I can sense
Because I'm in the city.
anger.
It's not anger, it's a realism. It's a realism.
I grew up, I don't feel that way even today. Yeah, I'm a HR person, right? But I can accept that everybody have a certain preference, right? Everybody has some stereotype impression of another people of another race, every race, okay, right? But whether this thinking lead to my action of discrimination and so on, that will be racism, okay, right? I don't sense it. Not even in OnePeople.SG, right? I don't sense it.
But is it because you're in the majority?
Partly I'm in the majority. Because I'm in the majority, I feel good, comfortable in the majority. The survey does show that people in the minority don't feel that way, right? I think Malays particularly, right? I have some Malay friends who tell me this sense of marginalization is real, right? They somehow don't feel that they fit in, right? Something happens, especially if something of a terrorist nature, somehow they feel that people are now looking at them, you know. So, but I told them, well, it happens, right? But how does it affect you? People stop sitting next to you at the hawker center, at the MRT, right? Or where? I don't see this, see, right? I see people go down, queuing up next to somebody of a different race, comfortably, okay? So I don't sense like in some other countries, right? Where if a person of another race buy the house next door, the flat next door, your property value probably go up or down as a result. But it doesn't happen in a HDB case here, okay? Despite the HDB policy of reserving some flats for minorities. So I kind of don't share that, even though we are from quite similar generation.
Fadiah, would you agree?
Yeah, I don't know. Firstly, I don't think it's a generational thing, and again, I don't know, I have to play up with the whole minority card here because I think my perspectives are probably more parallel to Ivy's. I mean, I have a lot of these issues too, but okay, so I think there's a few things here, like what she was talking about. She was talking about institutional racism, which exists in Singapore. To the point that, you know, when it becomes part of your system, right, how you run your schools, how you organize people, you know, in terms of public housing, it becomes so normal and almost natural that people don't see the sort of divides anymore.
Can you give us, okay, now you're talking of, let's divide it. There's structural racism, which is by the regulations and all that, and there's also the sort of personal racism. Which one are you talking about?
I could talk about both because you cannot say that the personal just comes out of people's imagination. It's not a mere perceptive thing, you know, where people just imagine, because it has to be related to social, structural, material conditions, right? So, for instance, talk about SAP schools. You know, you mentioned SAP schools. When I went to my junior college, I was in a top 5 JC. So by that, you know, it means that, you know, there's only very few Malays. You can count with like one hand or two, maybe at the most.
Why is that? Because
firstly, you know, Malays, you just don't get a lot of Malay students going to better schools. And I mean, it's not because they're Malay or it's not because they don't study hard enough, but I mean, there are a lot of, again, I would talk about structural conditions. But I mean, the point is, so when I was in my junior college, you know, there are a lot of people's first Malay friend. They've never met a Malay. They've never had a real friend who's Malay. You know, Malays are just people they see outside of school or, you know, publicly, but not in school. So, in a way, it was nice for me to be able to share, oh yeah, this is what it's like being Malay, but at the same time, I kind of didn't like that feeling of, you know, that I was different and I was somehow, in a way, I felt I was kind of exoticized sometimes, you know.
Did you feel this only when you went to junior college?
Oh, I think earlier, not as much, but I think being Malay, it makes you conscious of your minority status since you're very young. I mean, even when I was in primary school, right, you know, I was in a top class and then there's only like 4 or 5 of us. Yeah, so you've already been made to feel conscious about your minority status. It's just that when you're younger and you're not conscious of all these other structural conditions that puts you where you are, you think that there has to be something different about you, you know, you're a different type of Malay probably, you know, you're just not like all the other Malays, and people tell you that, and so you think that it's true. But only as I got older and I realized that actually there are a lot of these other reasons that puts me where I am. So basically, I've been aware of that minority thing for a long time, but when you're in a position where you are really a minority within a minority, and then you become more conscious of that, and then you start questioning, is it because I really am just a different type of Malay? And a lot of people are comfortable with that, you know. The Malays who distance themselves from that, say, hey, look, I'm not like the rest of you Malays, you know, I'm different, I've worked hard and therefore I've made it up there. I mean, but I don't think it's that simple, and so I don't want to subscribe to that sort of thinking. But yes, I mean, when you talk about being a minority,
But you say some Malays
conscious.
feel that they've worked hard and therefore they're different. So this self-imposed racism also exists.
It's internalized racism. I mean, it's a
Yeah.
dialectical thing. You know, you cannot just say that racism is something that's been imposed from someone to another. I mean, for racism, for the logic of racism to make sense, it has to be internalized as well. People have to actually think that, hey, this is true, you know, this is real. And I mean, it happens for most of us. I mean, not just Malays, but in Singapore, we do internalize racism. Yeah, because it's part of our reality.
Okay.
Yeah.
So do you feel discrimination even today?
I mean, I would say that, you know, people do see, I mean, there are a lot of prejudiced perceptions, but I wouldn't say that I have been discriminated per se. Yeah, I mean, yes, people have had a lot of misunderstandings or being very ignorant, but discrimination is another thing which I wouldn't be so.
So you haven't
jump into.
experienced racial discrimination?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be so quick to jump into that. I mean, that's what I would say.
But is it a generational thing? You're young, and I've had young friends, Malay friends, who say that they do not experience racism.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably because of the position you're in. You know, probably when you're more educated, you come from a position of privilege. Chances are, you know, people would treat you in a more respectful way. But I would imagine that, say, if you are in a neighborhood school, for instance, or you don't do very well in school, you're more likely to be victimized by all these negative perceptions. But of course, when, you know, I have, you know, people say that, oh, you know, you're not like those people. I say that's a form of racism as well. I mean, that's a positive stereotype, and I don't think that's a good thing either. I wouldn't call that discrimination per se.
Okay.
Yeah.
Eleanor,
Well,
what was your experience? What is your experience?
I'm in the majority race, so it's hard for me to sort of experience. But I think
No, do you personally feel that you're in a privileged position, or?
I think it's quite clear. I think that's quite clear, because when you're in, it doesn't matter on what issue, but when you're in sort of the majority, then things are just sort of, it's just accepted. You are part of the group that in a sense makes the norm by definition. Therefore, what you desire, what you eat, what you speak, it feels common, and therefore by that reason alone, right, without any intention, without any desire to discriminate or to marginalize those who are in the minority on any given issue, whatever that might be, will always, I think, either feel extremely special on the one side or marginalized on the other. This is just a dynamic of groups, right, and how we behave as human beings. But I think what worries me a bit, just a little bit, about describing this question as one that is simply about race. I feel it is simplistic. Race is something we can say we can't do anything about, and therefore it's a thing that will just differentiate us and make us different. And then if we are racist, well, that's it, right? And I think it may be a surrogate for, so what I worry about is that we use racism as a surrogate or as a substitute for talking about problems that are actually remediable.
Yeah.
You know, we can't change the color of our skin, but we can make opportunity available to those who are, you know, lacking in opportunity, etc., right? And I actually think that today in Singapore, it's not a simplistic question of race. Now, some of the fault lines do indeed break along racial lines, but the ones that are worrying are not pure skin matters. They are matters about the rich and the poor, the divide between the classes. They're about differences between religious views that don't always break along racial lines either, but may well break along lines of education, privilege, etc. And again, I'm not minimizing the fact that some of those lines happen to coincide with racial lines. I'm not saying that they don't. But I'm saying that as long as we call it racial, then we have an excuse for not dealing with it. You know, and that, I think, is the danger of what's happening in this debate here tonight, and of the way in which the government is playing it as well, right? I mean, so
but
anyway,
if it doesn't
that's
exist, if it doesn't exist, why would the government want to play that card?
Well, because it's much easier to talk about it as a race issue than to talk about it as an inequality issue, as an opportunity issue. This is Singapore, where everyone was supposed to have opportunities, but lines of status and of class have precisely because of this capitalist and sort of meritocracy idea have essentially crystallized over the last few generations, and it's more the class point that's holding people exactly where they are, and unfortunately will continue to do so. And we can pretend that in the name of meritocracy, performance is what determines everything, but then we don't take into account the fact that performance is inherently related to all sorts of things like inbuilt opportunity, not to mention genetics, of course. So I mean, now we're on this wonderful jag where we can totally feel proud and wonderful about where we are, because oh my God, we so deserve it, right? And that's the sort of society that has, whether wittingly or not, been created in this society. And I think it's actually much easier to turn around and just say it's about race. And not
Eleanor, I agree with you, but don't you think that many things that are done, for example, a simple example is the media. When they give primary 6 results, right? They always tell you how many Malays do how many Indians do how many.
They stopped that, right?
Yeah,
But they have been doing it. So to me, why should they do it?
Was it to encourage maybe the Malays to strive
no, they
for
should
more
look at,
better
I have
results?
said this many times, even to the Straits Times people. Long ago, I almost punched one of the editors in the face, actually, when we're talking about the SEP schools. I said, why do you keep putting Indian, Chinese, all that? So, no, it's not a racist thing. I said, of course it is. I said, why don't you put according to the social, the economic status of the family. Income family,
but that's discrimination of a different form.
No, it's not discrimination. That's to show the government that is the problem.
That's a real problem.
Almost every day I meet kids who are needy kids who come to my farm. I'm convinced that every Singaporean kid is a needy kid, boy.